Lieutenant Commander Sarah Martinez stood at her kitchen window, watching her 8-year-old daughter Emma practice soccer kicks in the backyard. The morning sun cast long shadows across their suburban lawn in Virginia Beach, and for a moment everything felt perfectly normal. Sarah had built this life carefully over the past 8 years, piece by piece, creating a world where the roar of A-18 Super Hornets felt like a distant memory. The phone rang, interrupting her peaceful moment. Sarah glanced at the caller ID and froze. The number belonged to Naval Air Station Pensacola. Her hand trembled slightly as she answered. "Lieutenant Commander Martinez speaking," she said, her voice steady despite the sudden racing of her heart. "Sarah, this is Captain Williams from the Blue Angels program. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. She hadn't heard from anyone connected to the Blue Angels in years. After her medical discharge following the accident, she had deliberately severed all ties with that part of her life. The Blue Angels were her past, buried deep beneath layers of civilian routine and the comfortable predictability of her current job as a flight instructor at a local aviation academy. "Captain Williams," she replied carefully. "What can I do for you?" "We have a situation, Sarah. We're down a pilot, and we need someone with your experience. I know it's been a long time, but your record speaks for itself. The team needs you." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the familiar knot form in her stomach. 8 years ago, she had been Blue Angel number 4, flying the slot position in some of the most demanding aerial demonstrations in the world. She had lived and breathed those blue and gold jets, pushing the limits of physics and human endurance in front of millions of spectators. But that life had ended abruptly on a humid afternoon in Pensacola, when her aircraft suffered a catastrophic engine failure during a routine practice flight. The ejection had saved her life, but the injuries to her back and the psychological trauma had ended her Blue Angels career. The doctors had cleared her to fly again after 18 months of recovery, but something inside her had changed. The fearless pilot who had once danced through the sky in tight formation with 5 other aircraft had been replaced by someone who questioned every decision, who saw danger in every cloud formation. "Captain, I appreciate the call, but I'm not that person anymore," Sarah said, watching Emma execute a perfect kick that sent the soccer ball sailing into the goal net she had set up. "I haven't flown anything faster than a Cessna 172 in 8 years. Sarah, I understand your hesitation, but we've had our eye on you. Your flight instructors at the academy rave about your skills. You're still one of the best pilots we've ever had in the program." Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Best pilots don't crash their aircraft, Captain. Best pilots save lives when everything goes wrong, which is exactly what you did. The investigation cleared you of any wrongdoing. Mechanical failure isn't pilot error." The words hung in the air between them. Sarah had heard them before, from accident investigators, from her commanding officers, from her therapist. Intellectually, she knew they were true. Emotionally, she still carried the weight of that failure like a stone in her chest. "Look," Captain Williams continued, "I'm not asking for an answer right now, but I'm asking you to come down to Pensacola. See the team, see the aircraft, remember who you used to be." "I know who I used to be," Sarah replied. "That's exactly the problem. Maybe it's time to find out who you are now." After she hung up, Sarah stood in her kitchen for a long time, staring at the Blue Angels refrigerator magnet Emma had bought her at an air show 3 years ago. It was the only reminder of her former life that she had allowed to remain visible in their home. Emma knew her mother had been a Navy pilot, but Sarah had kept the details vague, focusing instead on building a stable, grounded life for her daughter. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Sarah found herself in the garage, pulling down a box she hadn't opened in years. Inside were her flight suits, her patches, photographs from her time with the Blues. She lifted out her old helmet, running her fingers over the scratches and wear marks that told the story of countless flights. In one photograph, she was standing next to Blue Angel number 4, her aircraft gleaming in the Florida sunshine. She was smiling broadly, her arm draped casually over the wing. The woman in that photo looked fearless, confident, alive in a way that Sarah could barely remember feeling. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Captain Williams. "The team is in town for a demo flight tomorrow at Oceana. If you change your mind about visiting, you know where to find us." Sarah set the photograph down and picked up her phone. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for several minutes before she finally typed, "What time?" The next morning, Sarah told Emma she had to run an errand and drove the short distance to Naval Air Station Oceana. She parked outside the fence and watched as 6 blue and gold A-18 Super Hornets performed their precision maneuvers overhead. The sound of their engines sent a familiar electricity through her body, awakening something that had been dormant for 8 years. As the aircraft landed and taxied toward the hangar, Sarah found herself walking toward the flight line, drawn by a force she couldn't quite name. The pilots were climbing out of their cockpits, removing their helmets and laughing about something that had happened during the flight. They moved with the easy confidence she remembered, the swagger that came from knowing you could make a 17-ton machine dance through the sky with grace and precision. One of the pilots noticed her approaching and nudged his teammate. Within moments, all 6 members of the demonstration team were looking in her direction. Sarah suddenly felt exposed, like she was wearing a sign that announced her as the pilot who had crashed, the one who had left the program under a cloud of medical discharge and personal failure. Captain Williams emerged from the hangar and walked toward her with a smile. "Sarah Martinez," he called out. "Welcome back." The Blue Angels hangar felt like stepping into a cathedral of aviation. Sarah walked slowly between the 6 F-A-18 Super Hornets, each one positioned with military precision. The familiar smell of jet fuel and hydraulic fluid brought back a flood of memories she had worked hard to suppress. Her hands moved automatically, checking control surfaces and inspecting engine intakes with the practiced eye of someone who had once known these aircraft better than her own car. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" Lieutenant Commander Jake Viper Thompson appeared beside her. Sarah recognized him from the demonstration she had just watched. He was the current Blue Angel number 4, flying the position she had once held. "They always were," Sarah replied, running her hand along the smooth fuselage. "How long have you been with the team?" 2 years. This is my 2nd season." Jake studied her face carefully. "Captain Williams told us who you are. I've watched videos of your flights. That knife-edge pass you used to do in the diamond formation was legendary." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "That was a long time ago. Not that long. Skills like yours don't just disappear." Before Sarah could respond, Captain Williams approached with a clipboard in his hand. "Sarah, I'd like you to meet the current team. You already know Jake. This is our lead pilot, Commander Rick Hawk Harrison, and our narrator, Lieutenant Commander Lisa Phoenix Chen." Each pilot shook her hand with genuine warmth, but Sarah could see the questions in their eyes. They were wondering why she had left, whether the rumors about her accident were true, and most importantly, whether she still had what it took to fly with the best naval aviators in the world. "We're doing a practice flight this afternoon," Captain Williams said. "Nothing fancy, just some basic formations. Would you like to ride along in our 2-seat trainer?" Sarah's stomach clenched. She hadn't been in the back seat of an F-A-18 since her accident. The idea of climbing into that narrow cockpit, of feeling the aircraft accelerate down the runway, sent a wave of panic through her that she fought to keep hidden. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said quietly. "Why not?" Phoenix asked. "You're still current on your flight physical, right?" Sarah nodded reluctantly. She had maintained her medical certification more out of habit than necessity, getting her annual flight physical at the base hospital, where no one asked too many questions about why a former Blue Angels pilot was teaching teenagers to fly Cessnas. "Then what's the problem?" Jake pressed gently. "You said yourself you're still flying. This is just a different aircraft." The problem, Sarah thought, was that this wasn't just a different aircraft. This was the same type of machine that had nearly killed her 8 years ago. The same cockpit where she had felt the sickening lurch of engine failure. The same ejection seat that had rocketed her into the sky while her aircraft spiraled toward the ground in flames. But she couldn't say any of that to these young pilots who were looking at her with such respect and curiosity. Instead, she heard herself saying, "Okay, one flight." An hour later, Sarah found herself suiting up in a flight suit that felt both foreign and familiar. The other pilots helped her adjust her harness and check her oxygen connections, their movements efficient and professional. She was grateful that they didn't treat her like some kind of museum piece or relic from the past. As they walked toward the 2-seat FA-18F Super Hornet, Phoenix fell into step beside her. "You know, I almost washed out of flight school," she said conversationally. "Failed my 3rd carrier landing qual. I was so terrified of night traps that I was freezing up on the controls." Sarah glanced at her. "What changed?" "My instructor told me that fear is just information. It's your brain trying to keep you alive. The trick is learning to acknowledge it without letting it control you. Phoenix smiled. He said the best pilots aren't the ones who aren't afraid. They're the ones who are afraid and fly anyway. As Sarah climbed the ladder to the rear cockpit, her hands shook slightly. The familiar layout of instruments and displays surrounded her like old friends, but they also reminded her of the last time she had sat in a similar seat, watching warning lights flash red and feeling her aircraft shudder under the stress of catastrophic failure. Phoenix settled into the front seat and began the pre-flight checklist. Her voice came through the intercom system, calm and professional. "You okay back there, Sarah?" "Fine," Sarah lied, forcing herself to breathe normally as the engine spooled up. The taxi to the runway felt eternal. Every bump and vibration sent adrenaline coursing through her system. When they reached the end of the runway and Phoenix pushed the throttles forward, Sarah gripped her ejection seat handle so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The acceleration pressed her back into her seat as the Super Hornet gathered speed. Sarah watched the airspeed indicator climb. 100 knots. On 140. At 160 knots, Phoenix pulled back on the stick and the aircraft lifted gracefully into the air. For the first time in 8 years, Sarah was flying in an A-18 Super Hornet. The sensation was overwhelming. The power, the speed, the incredible responsiveness of the aircraft brought back everything she had loved about flying fighters. As they climbed through 10,000 feet, Phoenix rolled into a gentle turn, and Sarah felt the familiar G-forces pushing her into her seat. "How does it feel?" Phoenix asked over the intercom. Sarah was surprised to find tears streaming down her face inside her oxygen mask. "Like coming home," she whispered. They joined up with the other 4 Blue Angels aircraft in a loose formation. Through her canopy, Sarah could see the other pilots waving at her, welcoming her back to their exclusive fraternity. For a moment, it was as if 8 years had never passed. She was part of the Blues again, flying with the best pilots in the world. But as they began practicing formation maneuvers, Sarah's anxiety returned. Watching the other aircraft move closer and closer, sometimes with only feet separating their wingtips, brought back the hypervigilance that had plagued her after her accident. Every small movement, every adjustment in formation spacing, made her tense up. When Jake moved his aircraft into the slot position behind and below the lead, exactly where Sarah used to fly, she felt a stab of something that might have been jealousy or grief or regret. That should have been her position, her aircraft, her life. After they landed, the team gathered in the briefing room to debrief the flight. Sarah sat quietly while they discussed formation spacing, timing, and minor adjustments to their routine. It was the same kind of technical discussion she had participated in hundreds of times during her Blue Angels career, but now she felt like an outsider looking in. "Sarah, what did you think?" Captain Williams asked. "Any observations from the back seat?" Sarah considered her words carefully. "Your timing on the crossover pass is about half a second slow, and the diamond formation could tighten up by about 2 feet on the right side." The pilots exchanged glances. These were exactly the kind of precise observations that only an experienced demonstration pilot would notice. "Anything else?" Jake asked. Sarah met his eyes. "You're flying my old position very well. Better than I ever did." As the team began to pack up their gear, Captain Williams approached her. "So what do you think? Are you interested in coming back?" Sarah looked around the briefing room, at the charts and photos and squadron patches that decorated the walls. This had been her world once, the thing that had given her life meaning and purpose. But that was before the accident, before Emma, before she had learned that there were other ways to find fulfillment. "I need time to think about it," she said finally. "Of course. But Sarah, for what it's worth, you belong here. You always did." As Sarah drove home that evening, she found herself taking the long way, passing by the beach where she sometimes took Emma to watch the sunset. The flight had awakened something in her that she wasn't sure she was ready to confront. For 8 years, she had convinced herself that her flying days with the Blue Angels were over, that she was content with her quiet life as a civilian flight instructor. But one afternoon in the cockpit of an FA-18 had shattered that carefully constructed illusion. Emma was waiting on the front porch when Sarah pulled into the driveway, her soccer ball tucked under one arm and a curious expression on her face. At 8 years old, she had developed an uncanny ability to read her mother's moods, and Sarah knew she wouldn't be able to hide the emotional turmoil of the afternoon. "Mom, you look different," Emma said as they walked into the house together. "Different how?" Sarah asked, setting her keys on the kitchen counter and trying to act casual. "I don't know. Like when you watch those airplane shows on TV and you get that weird look on your face." Sarah smiled despite herself. Emma's perceptiveness never ceased to amaze her. "I went to see some old friends today. People I used to work with." "The airplane people?" Sarah had always been vague about her military career, telling Emma only that she used to fly planes for the Navy. But children have a way of piecing together information, and Emma had gradually figured out that her mother's past involved more than just routine flights. Yes, the airplane people. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Sarah found herself on the back deck with a cup of coffee, staring up at the stars. The night was clear enough to see the constellation Orion rising in the east. She had navigated by those same stars during countless night flights, using celestial navigation as a backup to modern GPS systems. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed her sister Maria's number. "Hey, stranger." Maria's voice was warm and familiar. "I was just thinking about you. How's my favorite niece?" "Emma's fine. Getting too smart for her own good." Sarah settled back in her deck chair. "How are things in San Diego?" "Same old chaos. 3 kids, 2 jobs, 1 very patient husband." Maria paused. "You sound weird, Sarah. What's going on?" Sarah had always been close to her younger sister, but they had grown apart somewhat since Sarah's accident. Maria had been there during the worst of her recovery, flying out to help with Emma while Sarah went through physical therapy and psychological counseling. But as Sarah had rebuilt her life, she had become more private, more closed off from the people who cared about her. "The Navy called me yesterday," Sarah said. "The Blue Angels want me to come back." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Wow," Maria finally said. "I thought you were done with all that." "So did I." "What did you tell them?" "That I'd think about it. I went to see them today, actually flew with the team." Another pause. And I remembered why I loved it so much. But I also remembered why I left." Maria's voice grew gentler. "Sarah, you didn't leave. You were injured. There's a difference, is there? I could have gone back to flying regular Navy missions after I recovered. Instead, I took the discharge and ran away to Virginia Beach to play it safe. You didn't run away. You made a choice to build a stable life for your daughter. There's nothing wrong with that." Sarah knew Maria was right, but part of her wondered if she had used Emma as an excuse to avoid confronting her fear of flying high-performance aircraft again. It was easier to teach student pilots in slow, predictable trainers than to face the possibility of another emergency. Another ejection, another brush with death. "The thing is," Sarah said, "when I was up there today, for just a few minutes I felt like myself again, like the person I was before everything went wrong. Maybe that person never went anywhere. Maybe she was just waiting for the right moment to come back." After they hung up, Sarah walked back into the house and stopped in front of the mirror in the hallway. The woman looking back at her was different from the one in the photograph she had found in the garage. 8 years older, more cautious, marked by responsibility and loss. But there was something else there too, something that the flight that afternoon had awakened. The next morning, Sarah called in sick to the flight academy and drove to the Norfolk Naval Museum. She hadn't been there since Emma was 5, but she suddenly needed to see the old A-18 Hornet on display in the main hall. The aircraft was an older model than the Super Hornets the Blue Angels flew now, but it was essentially the same machine she had ejected from 8 years ago. She stood in front of the static display for a long time, reading the placard that described the aircraft's capabilities and combat history. A group of elementary school children walked by with their teacher, and Sarah listened as the guide explained how Navy pilots trained for years to fly such complex machines. "Could you fly one of those?" one of the children asked their teacher. "Oh no," the teacher laughed.
"You have to be very special to fly planes like this."
"Only the very best pilots get to fly for the Navy." Sarah turned away from the display and walked outside to the museum's memorial garden. Among the granite monuments was a small plaque, dedicated to naval aviators who had lost their lives in training accidents. She read through the names, recognizing a few from her time in the service. These were pilots who had made the ultimate sacrifice in pursuit of their dreams, who had pushed the envelope too far and paid the price. She thought about her own accident, about the split second when her engine had failed, and she had to choose between trying to save the aircraft or ejecting to save herself. The investigation had concluded that she made the right decision, that attempting a dead-stick landing would have been suicide. But sometimes, in her darkest moments, she wondered if a braver pilot would have tried anyway. When she got home, Emma was at school and the house felt unusually quiet. Sarah made herself lunch and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the Blue Angels magnet on the refrigerator. Next to it was Emma's latest artwork, a crayon drawing of a house with 2 stick figures standing in front of it. "Me and Mom" was written in Emma's careful handwriting at the bottom. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from Jake Thompson. "Hey, thanks for flying with us yesterday. The team would love to have you visit again anytime. We're doing an airshow practice session Thursday if you're interested." She started to type a polite decline, then stopped. Something Phoenix had said during their flight kept echoing in her mind. The best pilots aren't the ones who aren't afraid. They're the ones who are afraid and fly anyway. Instead, she typed back, "What time on Thursday?" The response came immediately. 0800, looking forward to it. When Emma came home from school that afternoon, she found Sarah in the garage, going through more boxes of her Navy memorabilia. Photos, certificates, medals, and patches were spread out on the workbench like artifacts from an archaeological dig. "Mom, why are you looking at all this old stuff?" Sarah held up her Navy wings of gold, the pilot's insignia she had earned after completing flight training 22 years ago. "Do you know what these are, sweetheart?" Emma shook her head. "They're pilot's wings. I got them when I learned how to fly Navy airplanes. Were you a good pilot?" The question was so innocent, so direct that it caught Sarah off guard. "I thought I was. But then something happened that made me think maybe I wasn't as good as I believed." Emma picked up one of the Blue Angels patches, running her small fingers over the embroidered design. "My teacher says that good people sometimes have bad things happen to them, and it doesn't make them bad people." Sarah knelt down so she was at eye level with her daughter. "That's very wise advice. Are you going to fly airplanes again?" "I might. Would that be okay with you?" Emma considered this seriously. "Would you still be my mom?" "Always and forever. Then it's okay. But can I watch you fly sometime?" Sarah pulled Emma into a hug, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo and the lingering traces of playground sand. "We'll see, sweetheart. We'll see." That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah called Captain Williams. "Captain, it's Sarah Martinez. I've been thinking about your offer." "I'm glad to hear from you, Sarah. What's your decision?" Sarah looked out the window at the night sky, where aircraft from nearby Naval Air Station Oceana were practicing night operations. She could see their navigation lights blinking as they flew overhead, pilots pushing themselves to master one of the most challenging aspects of naval aviation. "I'd like to come back for more training flights, but I have conditions." "Name them." "First, this has to work around my daughter's schedule. She comes first, always." "Understood." "Second, I want to take this slowly. No pressure, no timeline. If I decide this isn't right for me, I walk away with no questions asked." "Fair enough." "And third, I want complete honesty from you and the team. If you think I'm not performing at the level you need, tell me immediately." "I won't be anyone's charity case," Captain Williams chuckled. "Sarah, you clearly don't remember how this organization works. We don't do charity cases. If you're here, it's because you've earned it." After she hung up, Sarah sat in her kitchen for a long time, processing the decision she had just made. Tomorrow she would call the flight academy and arrange for some time off. She would start the process of potentially returning to the most demanding flying job in the world, the one that had nearly destroyed her 8 years ago. But tonight, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. The alarm clock buzzed at 5:30 a.m. on Thursday morning, and Sarah was already awake, staring at the ceiling. She had been lying there for the past hour, running through emergency procedures in her head and trying to calm the nervous energy that had been building since she agreed to return to Pensacola for more training. Emma was still sleeping when Sarah quietly made coffee and toast in the kitchen. She had arranged for her neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, to get Emma on the school bus, a backup plan they had used before when Sarah had early flights at the academy. But this felt different. This felt like the beginning of something that could change everything about their carefully ordered life. The drive to Naval Air Station Pensacola took 2 hours, giving Sarah plenty of time to think about what she was doing. The rational part of her mind kept pointing out all the reasons this was a bad idea. She was 38 years old, ancient by Blue Angel standards. She hadn't flown high-performance aerobatics in 8 years. Most importantly, she had a daughter who needed stability, not a mother who was chasing ghosts from her past. But another part of her, a part that had been dormant for too long, was singing with anticipation. This was what she had been born to do. Flying with the Blue Angels wasn't just a job, it was a calling. An art form that demanded everything a pilot could give and then asked for more. When she arrived at the flight line, the team was already in the middle of their morning brief. Captain Williams waved her in and found her a chair at the back of the room. Sarah listened as they discussed the day's training objectives: formation flying, aerobatic maneuvers, and emergency procedures. It was the same methodical approach to safety and precision that she remembered from her own time with the team. "Today, we're going to work on the diamond formation," Commander Harrison announced. "Sarah, you'll be flying with Phoenix in the two-seat trainer, observing from the slot position." The slot position. Sarah's old spot in the formation, flying just feet behind and below the lead aircraft. It was simultaneously the most thrilling and terrifying place to be in a Blue Angels demonstration, requiring absolute trust in your teammates and split-second reflexes. As they walked to the aircraft, Jake fell into step beside her. "Nervous?" he asked. "Terrified," Sarah admitted. "Good. That means you're taking this seriously." He paused. "Can I ask you something? What was it like, your accident?" Sarah had been expecting this question eventually. The young pilots were curious about what had happened to the legendary number 4 pilot who had suddenly disappeared from the team 8 years ago. "Fast," she said. "1 second everything was normal. The next second I was hanging from a parachute watching my aircraft hit the ground. The whole emergency sequence from engine failure to ejection took maybe 30 seconds. Did you think about trying to save the plane?" "For about 2 seconds. Then training kicked in and I pulled the handles." Sarah stopped walking and turned to face him. "Jake, the day you stop trusting your training, stop listening to that voice in your head that tells you when something's wrong, is the day you should hang up your wings." 20 minutes later, Sarah was strapped into the back seat of the A-18F, running through her pre-flight checks with Phoenix. The familiar routine was comforting, a reminder that some things never changed. Aircraft systems were aircraft systems, whether you were flying a Cessna 172 or a Super Hornet. "Ready back there?" Phoenix's voice came through the intercom. "Ready?" Sarah replied, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. The taxi to the runway was uneventful, but as they lined up for takeoff, Sarah felt the old anticipation building. This time she wasn't just going along for a ride. She was back in her element, preparing to fly formation with some of the best pilots in the world. Phoenix pushed the throttles forward, and they rolled down the runway, the powerful engines pushing them toward takeoff speed. As they lifted off and climbed into the crystal-clear Florida sky, Sarah felt some of her tension begin to ease. This part, at least, felt natural. They joined up with the other 4 Blue Angels aircraft at 8,000 feet, and Sarah watched as the diamond formation took shape around them. Phoenix smoothly moved their aircraft into the slot position, and suddenly Sarah was exactly where she used to be 8 years ago, flying formation in the heart of the Blue Angels diamond. The view was spectacular. Above her, the lead aircraft blocked out a portion of the sky. To her left and right, the wing aircraft maintained precise formation, their wingtips just a few feet away. It was like being inside a living, breathing work of art. 6 aircraft moving as one through the sky. "How does it look back there?" Phoenix asked. Sarah keyed her microphone, but found herself momentarily speechless. She was home. This was where she belonged, where she had always belonged. The fear was still there, but it was manageable now, controlled and channeled into heightened awareness rather than panic. "It looks perfect," she finally said. They flew for an hour, practicing various formations and maneuvers. Sarah found herself offering small suggestions about timing and positioning, her trained eye spotting tiny imperfections that could be corrected. It was like riding a bicycle, the skills coming back naturally even after years of disuse. But it was during the knife-edge pass, the maneuver that had once been her signature move, that Sarah felt the full weight of what she had lost. Phoenix rolled the aircraft 90 degrees and flew past the crowd line with the plane's wings perpendicular to the ground, a display of precision that never failed to amaze spectators. Sarah had performed this maneuver hundreds of times, but now she was just a passenger, watching someone else fly her old routine. After they landed and taxied back to the hangar, the team gathered for their usual post-flight debrief. Sarah sat quietly as they discussed the training flight, analyzing every aspect of their performance with the attention to detail that made the Blue Angels legendary. "Sarah, any observations?" Captain Williams asked. The formation looked good from the slot position, she said. But I think you could tighten up the knife edge pass by about half a second. The timing was just slightly off. Commander Harrison nodded. That's exactly what I was thinking. Jake, what do you think? The discussion continued for another 20 minutes, covering every detail of the flight. Sarah found herself drawn back into the collaborative atmosphere of the team, the shared pursuit of perfection that had once driven her to be the best pilot she could possibly be. As the meeting broke up, Captain Williams approached her. Sarah, I'd like you to start thinking about getting back in the left seat, not as a passenger, but as a pilot. Sarah felt her stomach clench. I don't know if I'm ready for that. I think you're more ready than you realize. But there's only one way to find out. That evening, Sarah drove home in a daze. The day had been both exhilarating and overwhelming. Confirming what she had suspected. She still had the skills to fly with the Blue Angels, but she wasn't sure she had the courage. Emma was waiting for her with a science project spread across the kitchen table, a model of the solar system that required careful positioning of painted styrofoam balls. How was your airplane day, Mom? Emma asked without looking up from her work. Good. Challenging. Sarah sat down beside her daughter and picked up one of the planets. How was school? Mrs. Johnson said we might get to visit the Air Museum next month. She said they have real fighter jets there. Sarah smiled. They do. I used to fly planes like that. Emma finally looked up, studying her mother's face with the same intensity she had been applying to her science project. Do you miss it? The question caught Sarah off guard with its simplicity and directness. Yes, she said. I do miss it. Then maybe you should do it again. Sarah hugged her daughter, marveling at the wisdom that children sometimes possessed. Maybe I should. That night after Emma had gone to bed, Sarah called her sister Maria. I flew today, she said without preamble. How did it go? Better than I expected. Worse than I hoped, Maria laughed. That sounds about right. Are you going back? I think so. They want me to start flying solo again, not just riding in the back seat. Scary. Terrifying. But also necessary somehow. I feel like I've been sleepwalking for the past 8 years, just going through the motions of living instead of actually living. What about Emma? Sarah looked toward her daughter's bedroom door. She'll be fine. She's stronger than I give her credit for. And maybe it's time she saw her mother chase something that matters instead of just playing it safe all the time. You know I support whatever decision you make, right? I know. And that means everything to me. After she hung up, Sarah walked out onto her back deck and looked up at the stars again. Somewhere up there, other Navy pilots were flying night missions, pushing themselves and their aircraft to the limits of performance and endurance. For 8 years, she had been content to watch from the ground. But tomorrow she was going to start the process of joining them again. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. But for the first time since her accident, Sarah felt truly alive. The morning Sarah was scheduled for her first solo flight in 8 years. She woke up at 3 a.m. with her heart racing and her sheets soaked in sweat. She had been dreaming about the accident again, reliving those terrifying moments when her engine had failed and she had to make the split-second decision to eject. In the dream, though, she hesitated too long, and instead of a successful ejection, she rode the aircraft into the ground. She sat on the edge of her bed, forcing herself to breathe slowly and steadily. The flight wasn't scheduled until 10 a.m., but she knew she wouldn't be getting any more sleep. Instead, she made coffee and sat at her kitchen table, reviewing the flight plan and emergency procedures she would need to execute in just a few hours. Emma found her there when she came down for breakfast, still in her pajamas and carrying her favorite stuffed dolphin. "Mom, why are you awake so early?" Emma asked, climbing onto the chair next to Sarah. "I couldn't sleep, sweetheart. I have an important flight today." Emma studied her mother's face with the perceptive eyes of a child who had learned to read adult emotions. "Are you scared?" Sarah considered lying, telling Emma that everything was fine, that Mommy was just excited about her new opportunity. But she'd always tried to be honest with her daughter, even about difficult subjects. "Yes, I'm scared. But sometimes we have to do scary things because they're important. Like when I had to get my shot at the doctor's office. Exactly like that." Sarah smiled and pulled Emma into her lap. Sometimes being brave isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing what you need to do anyway. After dropping Emma off at school, Sarah drove to Pensacola with her hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. She had flown hundreds of missions during her Navy career, including combat deployments to the Persian Gulf, but none of them had made her as nervous as this single training flight. The Blue Angels team was waiting for her in the briefing room, along with Captain Williams and a flight surgeon she didn't recognize. The formality of the setting made it clear that this wasn't just another training exercise. This was her evaluation, the flight that would determine whether she had what it took to return to the team. "Morning, Sarah," Commander Harrison said as she took her seat. "Ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears. The brief was thorough and professional. They would start with basic formation flying, then progress to more complex maneuvers if Sarah felt comfortable. Jake would be her wingman, staying close but giving her room to reacquaint herself with the aircraft. Most importantly, there was no pressure to complete the entire flight plan. If she felt uncomfortable at any point, they would return to base immediately. As they walked to the aircraft, Sarah found herself automatically going through the pre-flight inspection routine she had performed thousands of times before. Her hands moved over the control surfaces, checking for damage or foreign objects. She verified the fuel load, the hydraulic systems, the ejection seat. It was muscle memory, as natural as breathing. But when she climbed the ladder to the cockpit and settled into the pilot's seat, Sarah felt a wave of panic wash over her. This was the same type of aircraft that had nearly killed her. The same ejection seat that had saved her life but ended her career. The same controls that had become useless when her engine had failed 8 years ago. "You okay up there?" Jake's voice came through her headset as he strapped into his own aircraft 20 feet away. Sarah forced herself to run through the startup checklist, each item helping to calm her nerves through its familiarity. "I'm good," she replied, though she wasn't sure if that was true. The engines spooled up smoothly, and Sarah felt the familiar vibration of the A-18 coming alive around her. She went through the pre-taxi checks, testing the flight controls and verifying that all systems were operating normally. Everything looked good, but her heart was still racing. Ground control cleared them to taxi, and Sarah released the brakes and followed Jake toward the runway. The aircraft felt heavier than she remembered, more powerful and more demanding of respect. For 8 years she had been flying aircraft that weighed less than 3,000 pounds. Now she was back in control of a machine that weighed over 25,000 pounds and could break the sound barrier. At the end of the runway, they ran through the final checks before takeoff. Sarah tested the engines at full power, watching the gauges carefully for any sign of malfunction. Everything was normal, but she found herself hyper-vigilant, seeing potential problems in every small variation in engine temperature or fuel flow. "Tower, Blue Angel 104 and 106 ready for departure," Jake called. "Blue Angels 104 and 106, cleared for takeoff." Sarah lined up on the runway and pushed the throttles forward. The acceleration was immediate and overwhelming, pressing her back into her seat as the Super Hornet gathered speed. At 160 knots, she pulled back on the stick and felt the aircraft lift off the ground. For a moment, as they climbed into the clear Florida sky, Sarah felt pure joy. This was what she had missed most about flying fighters: the incredible power, the precision, the feeling that she and the aircraft were partners in an elaborate dance through three-dimensional space. But as they reached their assigned altitude and began forming up for basic formation flying, the fear returned. Jake moved his aircraft closer to hers, and Sarah found herself tensing up as the distance between them decreased. In her peripheral vision, she could see his wingtip just a few feet away, close enough that any small mistake could result in a mid-air collision. "Formation looks good," Jake called over the radio. "How does it feel?" "Different," Sarah replied honestly. "I'm more aware of the dangers than I used to be." They practiced basic maneuvers for 30 minutes, with Jake gradually moving closer as Sarah's confidence grew. The skills were still there, the muscle memory and spatial awareness that had made her one of the best formation pilots in the Navy. But they were overlaid now with a caution that hadn't been there before, a hypervigilance that made every small movement feel significant. "Let's try a crossover pass," Jake suggested. "Nice and easy, plenty of separation." In a crossover pass, two aircraft approach each other head-on, then pass with one aircraft going high and the other going low. It was one of the fundamental maneuvers in aerobatic flying, requiring precise timing and absolute trust in your wingman. Sarah had performed thousands of them during her Blue Angels career. They separated by several miles, then turned toward each other, As they approached, Sarah felt her anxiety spike. Through her canopy, she could see Jake's aircraft growing larger and larger, approaching at a combined speed of over 800 miles per hour. Her rational mind knew that they had plenty of clearance, that this was a routine maneuver she had performed countless times before. But her emotional brain was screaming danger. At the last second, Sarah pulled up sharply, breaking the maneuver and climbing away from Jake's aircraft. Her hands were shaking as she leveled off at a higher altitude. "Sarah, you okay?" Jake's voice was concerned but not judgmental. "I need a minute," she replied, fighting to control her breathing. She flew straight and level for several minutes, trying to calm down and process what had just happened. She had broken one of the fundamental rules of formation flying. Never bail out of a maneuver unless there's an actual emergency. Her fear had overridden her training and her experience. "Jake, let's try that again," she finally called. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." They set up for another crossover pass, approaching each other from opposite directions. This time Sarah forced herself to trust her training and her wingman. As they passed each other, with Jake going high and Sarah going low, she felt a rush of accomplishment. It wasn't perfect. Her timing was slightly off and her flight path wasn't as smooth as it should have been. But she had completed the maneuver. They practiced for another hour, working through various formations and maneuvers. Sarah's confidence gradually returned as the familiar rhythms of tactical flying reasserted themselves. By the time they returned to base, she felt cautiously optimistic about her performance. The debrief was brutally honest, as Blue Angel's debriefs always were. Captain Williams and the other pilots analyzed every aspect of the flight, pointing out areas where Sarah's performance had been below standard. But they also acknowledged that she had shown real improvement over the course of the flight, and that her basic flying skills remained solid. "The question now," Captain Williams said, "is whether you want to continue. This was just the beginning. If you decide to come back to the team, the training will get much more intensive." Sarah looked around the room at the faces of the pilots she had flown with that morning. They were watching her with a mixture of curiosity and respect, waiting to see if she had the courage to continue down this path. "I want to keep going," she said, "but I need to talk to my daughter first. This affects both of us." That evening, Sarah sat Emma down for a serious conversation. She explained that the Navy was offering her a chance to return to her old job, flying with the Blue Angels demonstration team. It would mean traveling more, practicing more, and accepting more risk than her current job as a civilian flight instructor. "Would you be happy doing that?" Emma asked. "I think I would. But it would mean some changes for us. You might have to spend more time with Mrs. Peterson or maybe stay with Aunt Maria sometimes when I'm traveling." Emma considered tea. 3 months into her return to the Blue Angels, Sarah stood in front of her bathroom mirror at 5 a.m., looking at a woman she barely recognized. The soft civilian instructor had been replaced by someone leaner, sharper, more focused. The daily physical training, the intense flight schedule, and the constant pressure to perform at the highest level had transformed her body and mind in ways she had forgotten were possible. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma, who was spending the week with Maria in San Diego, while Sarah completed her final qualification flights. "Good luck today, Mom. Aunt Maria says to tell the sky you're not scared of it anymore." Sarah smiled, remembering the conversation she'd had with Emma before leaving for this intensive training period. Her 8-year-old daughter had somehow understood what Sarah was struggling with better than the adults around her. Emma had drawn her a picture of a blue airplane with "Brave Mom" written in crayon across the side, and Sarah had taped it to the dashboard of her A-18. Today was different from all the other training flights. Today she would be flying as Blue Angel number 4 in a full 6-plane demonstration routine for the first time since her accident. No safety pilots, no abbreviated maneuvers, no emergency escape routes. Just Sarah, her aircraft, and the trust of 5 other pilots whose lives depended on her precision and skill. The morning brief was subdued but intense. Weather was perfect, winds light and variable, visibility unlimited. The team would perform their full show routine, the same sequence they flew in front of hundreds of thousands of spectators every season. Sarah would be flying the slot position in the diamond formation, the most technically demanding spot on the team. "Remember," Commander Harrison said, looking directly at Sarah, "we've been building up to this for 3 months. You've flown every maneuver individually, every formation separately. Today we just put it all together." Sarah nodded, but her mouth was dry despite the water bottle she had been sipping throughout the brief. She had flown each piece of the demonstration routine multiple times, but never the complete 28-minute sequence. It was like learning to play individual notes on a piano and then being asked to perform a concert. As they walked to their aircraft, Phoenix fell into step beside her. "You know what the hardest part about coming back is?" she asked. "What?" "Trusting yourself again. You have all the skills, all the knowledge, all the experience. The only question is whether you believe you deserve to be here." Sarah climbed into her aircraft and began the pre-flight checks with mechanical precision. Every switch, every gauge, every system had to be perfect. In 30 minutes, she would be flying formation with less than 3 feet, separating her aircraft from the one in front of her, performing maneuvers at speeds approaching 400 miles per hour. There was no room for error, no second chances if something went wrong. The engines started smoothly and the 6 Blue Angels taxied to the runway in perfect formation. Sarah was number 4 in line, following Jake and flanked by the 2 wing pilots. Through her canopy, she could see the other pilots going through their final checks. Their movements confident and precise. Tower. "Blue Angels ready for takeoff," Harrison called. "Blue Angels." Winds calm, cleared for takeoff. They took off in sequence, each aircraft launching into the clear morning sky with 40-second intervals. Sarah's takeoff was smooth and controlled, the powerful engines lifting her aircraft effortlessly into the Florida sunshine. As she climbed through 1,000 feet, she could see the other 5 aircraft ahead of her, already beginning to form up for the first maneuver. "Blue Angels, rejoin overhead the field for diamond formation," Harrison commanded. This was it. Sarah pushed her aircraft toward the formation point. Watching as the other Blue Angels moved into position with ballet-like precision, she slotted into the number 4 position, just behind and below Harrison's lead aircraft, with the 2 wing pilots on either side. For a moment, as they stabilized in tight formation, Sarah felt a rush of pure joy. She was back where she belonged, flying with the best pilots in the world in front of an imaginary crowd of spectators. This was what she had been born to do, what she had sacrificed everything to achieve and then walked away from in fear. "Diamond formation looks good," Harrison called. "Let's run the show." For the next 28 minutes, Sarah flew the most demanding demonstration routine in military aviation. They performed knife-edge passes with their aircraft rolled 90 degrees, flew head-on toward each other at closing speeds of 800 miles per hour, and executed precision formations that required split-second timing and absolute trust in every team member. During the signature 4-plane diamond loop, Sarah found herself inverted at 300 feet above the ground, looking down at the Florida landscape through the top of her canopy. 8 years ago, this maneuver had terrified her after her accident. Today, it felt like coming home. The crossover pass that had given her so much trouble during training went flawlessly. As Jake approached from the opposite direction, Sarah held her altitude and heading steady, trusting in the geometry and timing they had practiced hundreds of times. They passed with perfect vertical separation, and Sarah felt a surge of confidence that carried her through the rest of the routine. But it was during the final maneuver, the 6-plane Delta formation pass, that Sarah truly understood how much she had changed. Flying just feet away from 5 other aircraft, moving through the sky in perfect harmony, she felt no fear, no anxiety, no doubt about her place on the team. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. As they landed and taxied back to the hangar, Sarah could hear the radio chatter from the other pilots, their voices filled with excitement and satisfaction. They had executed a flawless demonstration flight, the kind of performance that would have earned a standing ovation from any crowd. The debrief was surprisingly short. There were a few minor timing issues to discuss, some formation spacing that could be improved, but overall the flight had been exceptional. Captain Williams stood at the front of the room looking at his 6 pilots with evident pride. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "that was Blue Angel's demonstration flying at its finest. Sarah, congratulations. You're officially back on the team." The other pilots erupted in applause, and Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. For 8 years, she had convinced herself that this moment would never come again, that her accident had permanently grounded her dreams. But here she was, officially restored to the ranks of the Blue Angels demonstration team. After the formal ceremonies and paperwork were complete, Sarah found herself alone on the flight line, as the sun began to set over the Gulf of Mexico. Her aircraft, Blue Angel No. 4, sat gleaming in the hangar lights with her name painted just below the canopy rail. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Martinez, Blue Angels 2025. Her phone rang and she saw Emma's number on the caller ID. "Mom, Aunt Maria told me you passed your test. Are you a Blue Angel again?" "Yes, sweetheart. I'm a Blue Angel again. I'm so proud of you. When can I watch you fly?" Sarah looked at the aircraft behind her, then up at the darkening sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. "Very soon, Emma, very soon." That night, she called Maria to arrange for Emma's return to Virginia Beach. They would need to make some adjustments to their living situation, but Sarah was confident they could make it work. Emma would spend the school year in Virginia Beach, where Sarah could maintain some stability and travel with the team during summer breaks and holidays. "How do you feel?" Maria asked. "Different. Better. Like myself again, but a version of myself that's been tempered by experience." "And the fear?" Sarah considered the question. "It's still there. It always will be. But I've learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's feeling the fear and choosing to act anyway." 2 days later, Emma was back home, and Sarah was showing her the official Blue Angels team photo, where she appeared in her flight suit with the other 5 pilots. Emma studied the photo carefully, comparing it to the old pictures she had seen from Sarah's first stint with the team 8 years earlier. "You look different in this one," Emma observed. "Different how?" "Older, but also, I don't know. Like you know something you didn't know before?" Sarah hugged her daughter, marveling again at her perceptiveness. "I think I do know something I didn't know before." "What?" "That sometimes the things we're most afraid of are the same things that make us who we're supposed to be." That evening, as they sat on the back deck watching aircraft from Naval Air Station Oceana practice night operations, Emma asked, "Mom, when's your first air show?" Sarah checked her phone for the team's schedule. 3 weeks. Pensacola Beach. It's going to be the first time I've flown a demonstration in front of a real crowd since my accident. Can I watch? You can do more than watch. You can be my special guest in the VIP section. Emma grinned. Will you do the knife edge pass? I'll do whatever the team needs me to do. As they watched the navigation lights of the practicing aircraft blink across the night sky, Sarah felt a deep sense of contentment she hadn't experienced in years. The journey back to the Blue Angels had been terrifying, challenging, and transformative, but it had also taught her something invaluable, that it's never too late to reclaim the dreams you thought you had lost, as long as you're willing to face your fears and trust in the skills. The morning of the Pensacola Beach Air Show dawned clear and calm, with the kind of perfect flying weather that made pilots believe in destiny. Sarah stood at the window of her hotel room, watching the Gulf of Mexico stretch endlessly toward the horizon, painted gold by the rising sun. In 6 hours, she would climb into Blue Angel No. 4 and perform in front of 300,000 spectators. Her first public demonstration since the accident that had changed everything. Emma was still sleeping in the bed beside her, exhausted from the excitement of the previous day's arrival and VIP tour. Sarah's daughter had been wide-eyed with wonder as the team showed her around the aircraft, explaining the complex systems and safety procedures that made Blue Angel's demonstrations possible. Emma had even sat in the cockpit of Sarah's A-18, her small hands gripping the control stick as she imagined what it would feel like to fly at 400 miles per hour, just feet above the beach. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from Maria. Watching the live stream from San Diego. Break a leg, sis. We're all so proud of you. Similar messages had been arriving all morning from former squadron mates, flight instructors from the academy, and even some of her old students. News of her return to the Blue Angels had spread through the tight-knit aviation community, and it seemed like everyone she had ever flown with was rooting for her success. But despite all the support and well wishes, Sarah felt the familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach as she prepared for the day ahead. This wasn't just another training flight or practice session. This was the moment when she would find out if she truly belonged back with the team, when 300,000 pairs of eyes would judge whether her skills matched her reputation. The team brief at 9 a.m. was professional and thorough, covering every detail of the 28-minute demonstration. Weather conditions were ideal, with light winds and unlimited visibility. The show site was perfectly configured, with the audience positioned safely behind established crowd lines. There were no variables, no unknowns, nothing that could serve as an excuse if something went wrong. Remember, Commander Harrison said as they concluded the brief. "We've practiced this routine hundreds of times. Today is just another practice session, except we happen to have an audience." But Sarah knew it was more than that. For her, this demonstration represented the completion of a journey that had begun 8 years ago with a catastrophic engine failure and a terrifying ejection. Every training flight, every formation practice, every moment of doubt and fear had led to this afternoon on Pensacola Beach. As they walked to their aircraft, the team moved with the quiet confidence that came from months of preparation and thousands of hours of practice. Sarah found herself automatically checking her equipment one final time. Helmet secure, survival vest properly adjusted, emergency procedures fresh in her mind. These were the rituals that helped transform nervous energy into focused performance. Blue Angel number 4 gleamed in the Florida sunshine, her name freshly painted below the canopy rail. Sarah ran her hand along the aircraft's fuselage, feeling the slight vibration from the auxiliary power unit that was keeping the systems alive. This machine had become an extension of herself over the past 4 months, as familiar and trusted as her own heartbeat. The pre-flight inspection was meticulous and complete. Sarah checked every control surface, every system, every component that could affect the aircraft's performance. In 90 minutes, she would be flying formation at airspeeds and altitudes that left no margin for mechanical failure. The aircraft had to be perfect. As she climbed into the cockpit and began her startup procedures, Sarah felt the transformation that always occurred when she strapped herself into an A-18. The anxious mother, the cautious flight instructor, the woman who had spent 8 years playing it safe all fell away, replaced by Blue Angel number 4, a pilot whose job was to perform impossible maneuvers with absolute precision. The engines spooled up smoothly, and the 6 Blue Angels taxied to the show line in perfect formation. Through her canopy, Sarah could see the massive crowd gathered on Pensacola Beach. Hundreds of thousands of people who had come to watch the world's premier military demonstration team perform their aerial ballet. Pensacola Tower. "Blue Angels ready for takeoff," Harrison called. "Blue Angels, Winscom cleared for takeoff. Have a great show." They launched in sequence, each aircraft accelerating down the runway and lifting into the crystal clear sky with 40-second intervals. Sarah's takeoff was smooth and powerful, the familiar sensation of the Super Hornet clawing its way skyward, never failing to thrill her. As they climbed to show altitude and began forming up for the first maneuver, Sarah caught a glimpse of Emma in the VIP section, wearing oversized aviation sunglasses and a Blue Angels t-shirt, surrounded by the families of the other team members. Her daughter was pointing up at the aircraft and explaining something to the adults around her, clearly in her element. "Blue Angels, rejoin for diamond formation," Harrison commanded. This was the moment Sarah had been preparing for since that first terrifying solo flight 4 months ago. She pushed her aircraft toward the formation point, sliding into the slot position with the smooth precision that had become second nature again. The 4-plane diamond stabilized perfectly, and Sarah felt the familiar rush of flying in tight formation with some of the best pilots in the world. "Diamond formation looks good. Let's give them a show." For the next 28 minutes, Sarah flew the most demanding demonstration routine in military aviation with flawless precision. Every maneuver, every formation, every pass was executed exactly as they had practiced hundreds of times. But there was something different about performing in front of a real crowd, an energy and excitement that elevated the entire team's performance. During the signature diamond loop, as they pulled through the top of their maneuver inverted at 300 feet above the beach, Sarah could see the massive crowd spread out below her through the top of her canopy. 300,000 people were watching her fly, trusting her and her teammates to perform safely and professionally, despite the incredible risks involved. The knife-edge pass, the maneuver that had once been her signature move, went perfectly. Rolling her aircraft 90 degrees and flying past the crowd line with her wings perpendicular to the ground, Sarah felt a surge of joy and accomplishment that had been missing from her life for 8 years. This was what she had been born to do, what all her training and experience had prepared her for. But it was during the final sequence, the 6-plane Delta formation pass, that Sarah experienced something she hadn't expected. As she flew in perfect formation with her 5 teammates, she suddenly understood that her accident 8 years ago hadn't been the end of her story. It had been a chapter, a difficult and painful chapter, but not the conclusion. The woman flying Blue Angel number 4 today was different from the one who had ejected from a failing aircraft in 2017. She was older, more experienced, tempered by loss and strengthened by the journey back. The fear that had once paralyzed her had been transformed into wisdom, the reckless confidence of youth replaced by the measured courage of maturity. As they completed their final pass and began the recovery to landing, Sarah felt a profound sense of completion. She had faced her greatest fear and emerged victorious, not because she had conquered the fear, but because she had learned to fly with it, to use it as a source of strength rather than weakness. The landing was smooth and professional, and as they taxied back toward the crowd line for the traditional post-show autograph session, Sarah could hear the roar of approval from the audience. The demonstration had been flawless, the kind of performance that reminded everyone why the Blue Angels were considered the finest military demonstration team in the world. As she shut down her aircraft and climbed out of the cockpit, Sarah was immediately surrounded by well-wishers and congratulations from the ground crew and support personnel, but her eyes searched the crowd for Emma, finding her daughter running toward the aircraft with tears of joy streaming down her face. "Mom, that was incredible. You were flying so close to the other planes, and that roll thing you did was amazing." Sarah scooped Emma up in a fierce hug, feeling the weight of 8 years of doubt and fear finally lifting from her shoulders. She had done it. She had returned to the Blue Angels, completed her first demonstration, and proven to herself and the world that some dreams are worth fighting for, no matter how long it takes to reclaim them. As the team gathered for their traditional post-show photograph, Sarah looked around at the faces of her teammates, the aircraft that had carried them safely through another perfect demonstration, and the crowd of families and supporters who had believed in their ability to overcome any obstacle. Captain Williams approached her with a smile. "How does it feel to be back, Sarah?" "It feels like I never left," she replied. "And like everything that happened in between was just preparing me for this moment." That evening, as she and Emma sat on the beach watching the sunset paint the Gulf of Mexico in shades of gold and crimson, Emma asked, "Mom, are you happy now?" Sarah considered the question carefully. 8 years ago, she would have defined happiness as the absence of fear, the certainty that nothing could go wrong. Today, she understood that true happiness came from facing your fears and choosing to pursue what mattered most, despite the risks involved. "Yes, sweetie,"